Welcome to Safeguard Safety 6 series. I have the privilege today of interviewing my friend Steve Unruh. First met Steve around, what was it, Steve, 2000, 2001?
Yeah, probably back that far.
At that time, he was lead safety advisor for Devon, Canada. Then he went on to Unruh. He's been a government regulator for WorkSafe BC. He finished his time in Canada as a regional manager for Enform. Steve now lives in St. Lucia. He remotely consults under the name Solstice Safety for a variety of Canadian oilfield organizations. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
So, I have 6 questions for you in this series. They start out easy and they get harder and harder. Are you up for the challenge?
I'm excited about the opportunity.
Excellent. Okay, question number 1. What is one of the biggest pieces of advice you'd give a beginner safety representative?
That's actually pretty easy because one of the biggest issues that comes up with safety people is that they're oftentimes viewed both by the workers on site as well as by the supervisors or the employer that they're working for. They are viewed as for serving the role as a enforcement or a policing person. And the strongest advice I could give to anybody going into this role is don't view yourself that way, and don't let your boss or your supervisor or even the people you're working to support in the field, don't let them drag you into that, because it's not your role. Your role is to support both your supervisor, your company. That's what you're there for. They're paying you. But you are not the person, and remember this phrase, you are not the person who has the authority to direct the work of others, because you don't. Not on site anyway. I mean, if you're a supervisor or you maybe have people working under you, that's different. But if you are a safety support person, you're a safety coordinator or a safety advisor or the safety guy, whatever that term might be applied to you, your role is to support both the workers in the field. And it's good if they know that. That's what you're there for, and you're not there to be a policing person, and you're there to support their supervisors and give them the tools. Your job is to give them the tools that they need to implement the safety management system. That's your role. In some respects, you'll come into, you'll be a liaison between them and, say, a regulating body or something like that. But that is your role. You do not have the authority to direct the work of others. And as such, you don't have that responsibility. You can't. So don't let people push you into, being a police officer. That's not your job. But be there and let them know you're there to support them. You're there to provide clarity in regards to how policies should be implemented, or how procedures should be developed, or how regulations can be interpreted. But that's your role. So.
What a great answer. You can't be everywhere at once, and it's one of the biggest mistakes of entry-level safety people is trying to oversee the safety program. Excellent answer, Steve. Question number 2. What books or videos or other sources of information would you recommend to listeners?
It would be nice if field level safety people had the time to read, purely for the purposes of expanding their knowledge, but that's not generally the case, not generally likely. Usually you're scrambling and looking for information on a specific topic. And for that, I actually there's lots of information, and my go-to always is the internet. Now, you got to be wise in how you approach that. There's lots of obviously suspect information out there, but if you're in Canada, all of the regulating bodies or not all, but most have excellent information on their websites. They're trying really hard to provide the labor force and to provide companies and workers with information to help them work more safely. That's their job, and they do it really well. So there's a wealth of information. I'd say WorkSafe BC, WorkSafe Alberta, WorkSafe Saskatchewan's a little leaner, but there is some good stuff in there. It kind of just depends on what they take as being important to the people that they support. Ontario has excellent information. And outside of the regulating bodies, there's also a website called the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety. They have a boatload of free information, and it's all good. It's virtually, they round it up from all over the place. Don't be afraid to look internationally. There's the government websites in England have excellent information. Government in Australia has excellent information, and the OSHA website down in the U.S. is amazingly well prepared and has a wealth of information. Now, from a regulatory perspective, their rules are all written differently, but the information that they can provide, it's amazing what's available out there. So.
Wow, good advice, especially the international stuff. Even though the Canadian standards are quite a bit higher in many cases, there's a lot of overlap. I've got some good stuff out of the U.S., including videos, even free videos on YouTube.
Yes, absolutely. And more and more. And again, regulating bodies are putting out more and more. Also, too, you will find, and again, you have to be choosy, but say manufacturers, Caterpillar, for instance, has a ton of information that they are applying from a manufacturing perspective, but directly related to health and safety and how their equipment gets used in the field. So, that's often a source. Caterpillar's pretty sophisticated in being as advanced as they are. So not everybody's kind of at that level, but you'd be surprised what's available when you start digging.
And as long as you accept the fact that there is a sales pitch in there, but there's some really good information surrounding it as well, then good point on your source, eh?
Yes. You can, like I said, regardless of where you get it, even the government websites, you do have to read everything with a grain of salt, because they too have a motivation that maybe isn't in agreement with the motivation of your industry or your company. So, and that doesn't make one right and the other wrong. It just means that sometimes you've got to be able to interpret how you're going to apply certain things and what the motivation is for putting them out. So. And they're not always right either. The regulators, they change their minds on lots of stuff. WorkSafe BC is a classic example. They had a law that prevented the advancement of escape systems off of drilling rigs for 10 years. There was better systems, but they couldn't be used because the law at BC stated that it had to be very specifically done a certain way. So, they're not, they're not the be all and the end all of information either, but they do happen to be the one that's enforcing, so you do kind of take them more seriously.
Good point. Okay, now we're going to get into some more difficult questions. You ready for it?
Fire away.
The biggest safety-related mistake that you've witnessed in your 2 decades as a career as a safety person, and the most important lesson that came out of that mistake?
That's a tough question. I've seen some pretty bad things. I'm going to generalize a little bit, because they generally the bad things that I've seen tend to come from the same failure, and that is a failure to actually properly hazard assess and then put controls in place. So I'm thinking specifically of a couple of incidents where the one did involve fatality. It wasn't one that I worked on, but it was one that was very prevalent in the industry, and that was a drilling rig hit a pocket of shallow, high-pressure gas that caused an explosion and a release of energy as well as fire, and somebody was killed in that incident. The interesting thing that happened after that was that it was knowable that hazard existed. Mm. And there was knowledge in the industry that hazard existed, and nothing had really been done, despite the knowledge, nothing had been done to pursue it so that it didn't happen again. So it had happened before, nobody got injured, and then it happened again and somebody died. And that's a really unfortunate way to learn a lesson. But unfortunately in our industry that tends to be, sometimes we learn before that, but oftentimes we only learn after, even though we knew better. So, failure to properly hazard assess and control on site when there is a lot of energy that has the potential for release, that's a big, that's probably the biggest mistake that I've seen. Another one was less, nobody died, but people were hurt very badly, and that was involving the use of chemicals again in a drilling situation. And the hazard was not adequately recognized, understood, and controlled, and some people got some pretty severe chemical burns as a result. And that kind of thing you look at and go, okay, well, that really didn't need to happen. They did know that there was a potential, and nobody really addressed it. They just kind of hoped it wouldn't happen. They kind of implemented some controls, but the controls didn't work properly. So I think when it's bad, I mean, there's other things that, a lot of other things that come into play, but I think those are probably the worst thing that I've seen is awareness of a hazard, not a full understanding of it, and then a failure to properly control. That's a big problem.
I almost started this series talking about a totally different topic about hazard assessments, because you can literally spend this full interview on hazard assessments, and in the future, I'd like to convince you to maybe come back and do our next series on hazard assessments, but we'll see how that goes. Because there is a lot to talk about when it comes to hazard assessments. I so agree with your take on this. Last question and hardest question, Steve.
All right.
We at Safeguard believe one of the keys to a successful corporate safety program is to convince the employees to opt into the safety program for their own personal reasons. Okay, this is called intrinsic value. Please give the listeners an example of your experience where you've helped create intrinsic value on one of the safety programs you've been responsible for overseeing.
Specific examples? For me personally, that's always been my method. I've never been a safety cop. I've never supported that as a methodology. It doesn't work. I can guarantee you that it doesn't work. I've seen more safety guys run off of locations because they tried to work that way, and it's not effective. I'd have to say, if fear is your motivator, your system will always fail, because as soon as you remove the implement that's causing the fear. So if your safety guy is a policing, a policing function, and you send him out there, and so he's on site for 2-3 days, 2-3 weeks, whatever the case may be, and then obviously he can't be there, and he can't be everywhere, as we've already discussed. Whenever they're not there, the behavior that they're attempting to correct will revert back to whatever it was before. That happens all the time, and until such time as the people you work for and the people you support in the field, until they recognize that you're there to help them to make their job better. I'll tell you, one of my biggest frustrations with the safety industry is that the word safety is in it. It is not about safety. It is about working safely. There's a huge difference. We've created a safety view of the world, or a safety culture that involves, and it's because the regulatory system does the same thing. Failure to meet your requirements under the law results in punishment. Okay, I understand the motive, or I understand how that evolved and why that came about, but you'll be far more effective if you convince people and you can show people that working safely is A, cost effective, and B, prevents injury and prevents damage and prevents all of the badness that comes along with that. You are far more effective when you can show people that it's good for them to go home at the end of the day with all their fingers. And you have to do it that way. You can try the other way. You may be asked to try it the other way. You may feel compelled to try it the other way. You will undoubtedly get frustrated by the failure of people to do things that to you are obvious. And at the same time, if you let that failure or that frustration move you into a place where you want to, use discipline as the motive force, you will fail. Guaranteed. It will not work. So, yeah, if you're going to spend energy working towards an injury-free workplace, then I strongly recommend that you spend that energy creating an environment where people want to go home safely at the end of the day.
My company's done a lot of work with Devon that you were previous safety rep for, and the guys have a lot of good things to say about your time in the office in Devon. So you have created some really good intrinsic value. Can you give the listeners one or two quick fixes that they can use to actually create that atmosphere you're talking about?
If I were to look back, I would say when you're in the field, get to know the people, get to know them personally, understand, if you can, what their world is, not just their world at work, obviously that's the first place you're going to interact with them. But their world at home, take the time to understand them as a person. And once you understand where they're coming from before they get to work, you will be far more successful at convincing them to work safely when they're at work, because you can help them in a host of other ways when you demonstrate that you care about them as an individual, they're far more likely to respond favorably to things that you might ask them to do that they'll look at and go, well, why do we have to do that? And you'll get that question every single time you try and implement anything. Why do I have to do it? And sometimes the answer isn't good. Sometimes it's, well, because the government says you have to do that. And maybe it doesn't make any sense, and I understand that. But, there's two levels of working safe, or there's two levels of implementing a safety program. One of it is motivated by law, and the other is motivated by a desire to be safe and not get injured. Those functions that are motivated by law tend to be a little harder to sell because sometimes they don't make sense. That's just the reality of it. But if they trust you as a human being, and they know that you are genuinely concerned about them because you've taken the time to get to know them, you will definitely have a far greater impact. And it's not always perfect, and it's not always easy, and you're still going to find people who don't want to play nice. But that's my biggest advice. You want to create an atmosphere that is that people are willing and feel like it's a good thing to participate in what it is that you're trying to get across. Get to know them as people.
I so agree with you, Steve. Trust and respect are critical to implementing a proper safety program. Looks like we're out of time now. So on behalf of Safeguard Safety 6 series, I appreciate you, Steve, giving us your time, and I hope the listeners have gotten a lot of value out of this. If you have, feel free to move on to the next Safety 6 series. Thank you.